Time for another scientific literacy lesson. This will be part one of a multi-part series about evolution. The theory of evolution has been overwhelmingly accepted by the scientific community for over 100 years, but interestingly is still debated or presented as a controversial topic in some arenas. Either deliberately or accidentally, evolution is often misrepresented in these debates. So in part one of this mini-series, we're going to talk about what evolution isn't and clear that up. But before we talk about what it isn't, let's talk about what it is. The idea that new species can be descended from previously existing species is not an idea that originated with the often referenced Charles Darwin. Even Greek philosophers before Socrates had theories about how life branched out to become the living variety we share Earth with today. As we grow closer to modern science, naturalists like Pierre-Louis Maupertuis published his theory on speciation over time in 1751, and Jean-Baptiste Lamarck's theory of transmutation, or transforming one species into another, was published in 1809. In fact, when Darwin was submitting his theory and his research to be published, Sir Alfred Russel Wallace sent to Darwin a paper outlining what was essentially the exact same theoretical conclusion. The concept hasn't been a new one for over 1,000 years, but the driving force wasn't clear. In 1859, Darwin published On the Origin of Species, which explained natural selection, or the driving force of evolution, in detail. Darwin's book went a long way to help evolution become widely accepted in the scientific community as an explanation for the diversity of life on Earth. Since that time, thousands of scientists and studies have expanded on the theory, contributing more evidence and a deeper understanding of the mechanisms that are at work. For example, Darwin theorized that all living things had a mechanism for transferring traits to their offspring, but he had no idea what DNA was or how genetics worked to explain how traits could be transferred between generations. This is the how of the evolutionary process, but when Darwin published On the Origin of Species, it hadn't been discovered yet. It would be another 70 years before we came to understand what DNA was and how it worked to pass traits on to offspring. The theory of evolution is a model that explains the diversity of life on Earth. According to this model, all life descended from a common ancestor. When selective pressures act on populations, members with inheritable genetic traits that make them more successful at reproducing are more likely to do so and pass on those genetic or inheritable traits. This process is called natural selection, and it is the engine for evolution. If populations are reproductively isolated from one another, and natural selection works on those populations over a long period of time, new species can arise. This process is called speciation, and over billions of years, natural selection accounts for the majority of life's diversity on Earth. The scientific community is aligned with this definition. The only opposition to evolution doesn't come from scientific observation or new evidence. Instead, it comes from criticisms which are religiously motivated. Currently, there is no scientific explanation for the diversity of life on Earth outside of evolution. But there are people who would like you to think that there are, or that the scientific community is divided on the topic. So let's move on to what evolution isn't. There are a handful of arguments used on a regular basis by the parties that would like you to think the scientific community is still grappling with this topic, and I'm not going to be able to cover all of those, or even most of them, but I have picked 3 of the worst offenders to take care of right away. So here goes. Evolution is not just a theory. The common argument against evolution is that it shouldn't be taken seriously because it's just a theory. This is just a misunderstanding about what the word theory means. In everyday use, a theory is just a hunch. When scientists use the word theory, its definition changes to a well-substantiated explanation of some aspect of the natural world that is acquired through scientific method and repeatedly tested and confirmed through observation and experimentation. They aim for predictive power and explanatory force. They support all the evidence and are contradicted by none of it. So when someone says to you that it's just a theory, they might not realize it, but what they're describing is the highest graduation of an idea in science. It's not just some baseless hunch. Claiming evolution is just a hunch is a blatant misrepresentation of what it is. Another common and extremely aggravating argument against evolution is that it argues everything came from nothing. Now, if you've been following along so far, you probably already recognize that where everything came from hasn't been mentioned once in the evolution debate. Seriously, go back and check the video again. This is a complete misrepresentation of what evolution is. The assertion that everything comes from nothing sounds like something that might be discussed in Big Bang cosmology, which is a completely separate scientific theory that's from a pretty distinct branch of science. Every part of Big Bang cosmology could be proven wrong today, and it wouldn't cast any doubt on the theory of evolution. One of the more nuanced arguments against evolution is that it doesn't explain the origin of life, and this can be misleading because technically the assertion is correct. Evolution doesn't explain the origin of life. Evolution only explains the diversity of life on Earth through natural selection, so life or its biological components had to come from somewhere first before natural selection could act on it. But that's the point. Evolutionary theory doesn't try to explain where life came from. There are scientists around the globe working right now to try to explain how life first arose on the planet. And we may never know the exact recipe or the steps that took place before life first arose, but every week we get a little bit closer to explaining how it might have happened through natural processes, and this is called abiogenesis. While these studies are often linked, abiogenesis is not a part of evolution. They're not dependent on each other. Evolution is only concerned with the speciation or diversification of life on Earth over time through natural selection. Right now we don't have a good answer for how life came to be on the planet, but not having a good answer for how life came to be in the first place does not cast any doubt on the explanation for the diversity of life on Earth today through evolution. Quick bonus round on logical fallacies. A logical fallacy is an error in reasoning, and being able to identify them is extremely important because logical fallacies can keep you from knowing the truth, and they can also make you susceptible to manipulation by people who are skilled in their use of rhetoric. Some types of logical fallacies are more common than others, so we name them. To wrap up this video, I want to introduce you to one of the most common logical fallacies out there, and the one that explains each of the misrepresentations of evolution we've reviewed so far. The fallacy is called the straw man. The straw man fallacy is when an argument is misrepresented to make it easier to attack. This can be done by exaggerating, misrepresenting, or completely fabricating someone's argument, making it easier to present one's own position as being more reasonable. Ultimately, this kind of dishonesty undermines honest, rational debate. When someone claims evolution is less reliable because it's just a theory, or it doesn't explain where everything came from, or it doesn't explain how life started in the first place, that person is committing a straw man fallacy. So let's elevate the status of the conversation and make these fallacious arguments go away forever. Next video, I'll go into some of the modern evidence for evolution. If you've got a specific argument against evolution you want to see addressed, just leave me a comment.